What's up, guys? This is Conduit, and today we're going to be going over what has widely become my favorite build and what I think is the second strongest build in the game, to the full tank Pib build, which is absolutely the strongest. I'll go over that another day. What we're going to be going over today is what I call the Trinity tank build, right? I throw around the term Trinity a lot, referring to the three most powerful weapons that you can carry on your person and use anywhere. And that is the sawed-off shotguns, because they deal over 4,000 damage in a second. The Lancaster, because it has the highest DPS of any of the lock-on weapons, while still having a reasonable accuracy. And the short-scope Carcano, although you could use a medium scope and still get away with it. I just keep a short scope because I like to swap off to things like Slip. But those are the three most powerful weapons you can have on slot, right? And because of that, we use them on this tank build. A lot of people do this kind of instinctively, but I want to walk through why you do it. So, sawed-off shotguns. Highest DPS you can achieve within a second, bar none. They're great at killing other tank builds, they're great at killing slips, they're great at killing everything that gets near you. Lancaster, as we already talked about, it can ping headshots and it can body shot spam reasonably well. It's also one of the best E-round weapons. Carcano, highest DPS at a range, it's basically the sawed-off shotgun of sniper rifles. Now, you may ask why we don't carry a Debo, and that is simply because I believe that the Debo is best served being used with painted black. Let's get into our cards. So, with our cards, we have S&S. S&S is a 20% damage reduction, bar none. It is the highest damage reduction you can get. It also gives you the ability to not be headshot except for the first quarter second when you enter S&S. And you carry that same time frame out. The first quarter second out of S&S, you also are still unheadshotable. There's a quarter second up, quarter second down time on it. Fool Me Once gives you 10% damage reduction up to 40%. That's 40% total on the player. So we already have 20 from S&S, and our Fool Me Once can stack us up to 40 with 10% per shot. So we have S&S active, then we go to 30 first time we're shot, 40 second time we're shot. Everything after that is 5%. Okay? Kick in the butt gives us back our Deadeye as we're shot. Since we can take a lot of bullets, we get a lot of our Deadeye back. It's a cost-saving measure, but it also makes it to where when Mauser spam or shotguns come at you, you are much more likely, through the combination of Fool Me Once and Kick in the Butt, to survive. But Kick in the Butt keeps your S&S active. Every time you're shot in S&S, a portion of your Deadeye is removed. Kind of like the opposite of what happens with Painted Black. We use Kick in the Butt to almost entirely counteract that, so that you have to eat through all of my health instead of eating through my Deadeye. A lot of you high-tier Pib or Focus players will know very, very well that you can kind of just spam Mausers or Semis or Sawed-Offs at an S&S player, and you can basically just rip their Deadeye off and kill them with the next shot. If they're running Kick in the Butt, that's much harder to do. Sharpshooter. Sharpshooter is the best passive card in the game, in my opinion, because it gives you 20% damage on your sniper rifles, any scoped weapon for that matter, and it gives you plus 20% damage reduction. It's the same as S&S, but it doesn't block headshots. Meaning that when you have S&S and Sharpshooter activated, your Fool Me Once, you're already at 40% when you're in your scope. Your Fool Me Once takes you to 45, 50, 55, 60, so on and so forth. That allows you to get stupid high resistances, especially if you're using Tier 3 tonics, Minty Big Game, and the like. We do all of this so that players that are much, much better than us cannot kill us outright with headshots and cannot rip our Deadeye off easily. Now, from here, I'm going to go into some gameplay and It'll probably just be a call to arms or something, but we'll have some form of gameplay, and I'm going to talk about general strategies. Alright, so what we settled on using for background was a King of the Castle, or part of it, against some relatively solid players, where we're going to be using the tank build we were talking about. And I want to talk about general strategies, right? So, your bread and butter is going to be your Carcano and your Sawed-Offs, right? Your Lancaster is a stand-in for middle range. And what you'll see is that you can compete with anyone on any range because of the fact that you can take so much damage. Really, what you're doing is you're trying to make it to where they have to outlast you, as opposed to playing this weird game, right? One of the things you may see a little bit of is that we have a Lancaster, so we can accuracy Q glitch, AQG, where we shoot through Slippery Bastard with a hammerlock weapon of some kind. Now, having all of these tools on one kit is basically the same as a Paint It Black build having, for instance, a bow, a bolt action, and sawed-offs, right? Like, it's a similar setup, or the bow Carcano sawed-off setup. They're all made to get results. And what you want is to play to the strengths of your weapons. The strengths we have here are that we are hard to kill, our weapons deal a reasonably high amount of damage, even though we have no damage cards really, and we want to play close and long range. We'll play middle if we have to, and there are times where we will do that. But your ultimate goal is to kind of play defensively, to camp a little bit. Be smart with your movement. Don't get yourself into situations where the other player gets to do what they want, and you'll be fine. The only things you really have to look out for, right? You have to look out for Erdebos, you have to look out for Ensigns, E-rounds, things like that, and you have to look out for Bolas. Everything else, as long as you are even close to as good as the player you're fighting, you should beat them. In fact, I would argue you can be like half as good as that player and normally get them. Now, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination a great player, but all of that together makes it to where you can perform some miracles, right? One of the common things that I see players do when they're running a tank build is they'll act like it's invincibility. You don't want to do that, right? That's kind of a low-level strategy that's trying to outstat your opponents, which doesn't normally work. You want to play just like you've got, I like to say like you've got focus fire, right? Play like you're super squishy, and you'll be fine. Like, you don't want to assume you have any advantages, because you probably don't. You want to play like there are no advantages for you to take, and you'll be fine because you're going to have basically a safety net. Yeah, think of it like that, like a safety net, you know? If you have the safety net, then you know you can do certain things. But if you play like there is no net still, you're going to do really well. Really, really well. The only place that you're really going to suffer is in that, like, range where it's really easy for you to get bullied. That's where you're going to suffer. That's where it's going to hurt. Aside from that, though, it's a powerful build. If you play smart, you'll be fine. I don't have much else to say on that. I will have another build coming out soon, guys, and have fun using it. Good luck.